You know what hurts the most? Seeing that look in your father's eyes saying you're stupid while you're killing yourself studying and nothing sticks in your head. Back then, I didn't even know I had a problem. I just knew it hurt. Good morning, my dears. This is Grandma Marcy. Marcella is my birth name, but everyone knows me as Grandma Marcy. I'm 73 years old now, carrying a story that began when I was just 6. I'm speaking to you from my window here in Brooklyn, New York, where the coffee is always hot and the memories, well, they never grow cold, even when the noise of cars and factories never stops outside. Before I begin this difficult story, I'd like to say something. This channel is growing thanks to you. Subscribe here, give this video a thumbs up, and tell me in the comments which part of America you're watching from. It could be your city, state, or even your neighborhood if you'd like. It makes me so happy knowing there are people from all over listening to what this old lady has to share. Also, let me know in the comments how old you are. I'm so proud to have you here with me. I was born tiny, you know? So tiny I could fit in the palm of my father's hand. 1 pound and 7 ounces, a 7-month preemie. Back then, in 1952, a child born like that was almost a miracle to survive. And I survived. But life always charges its price, doesn't it? My mother, Betty, always told me how she prayed day and night at the hospital when I was admitted. Marcella, you were so fragile that the nurses were afraid to even hold you, she would say. I stayed in that hospital for 40 days. Daddy worked as a loader at the Fulton Fish Market, and Mama did tailoring work from home. They scraped together every penny to pay the hospital bill and still ended up owing favors to half the neighborhood. I grew up seemingly normal, chubby even, because my mother thought food was medicine for everything. Eat a little more, Marcella, to get strong, she repeated at every meal like it was a prayer. And I ate, happy as could be, not knowing the problem wasn't with my body, but with my little brain. The first signs appeared when I started school. I was 7, a little delayed because Mama was afraid to send me earlier. I remember my first day like it was yesterday. Little blue dress with white polka dots that Mama had sewn all night, white socks, black shoes that pinched my toes. I was so happy. Finally, I was going to learn to read and write like the big kids. The teacher, Mrs. Johnson, was a lady with her hair pulled back in such a tight bun that it seemed to pull her entire face skin. She wrote on the blackboard with such neat handwriting that I thought was the most beautiful thing in the world. But that's when my torment began. The other children looked at the board, copied, understood. I looked and saw only marks that danced, letters that switched places, numbers that got mixed up. Marcella, why haven't you copied the lesson? Mrs. Johnson would ask. I did copy it, teacher, I'd answer, showing my notebook. But this isn't what's on the board, child. And it wasn't. I was sure I was copying correctly, but when I looked at the other children's notebooks, I saw that mine was completely different. The letters came out crooked, words missing pieces, entire lines skipped. I didn't understand what was happening. The weeks went by, and while the other children were already putting letters together to form words, I was still crawling. I cried hidden in the school bathroom. I prayed every night asking St. Jude of the impossible causes to make me smart. Mama soon realized something wasn't right. Every night she would sit with me at the kitchen table after washing the dinner dishes, hands still smelling of soap, and try to help me with homework. Come on, sweetie, let's try again. B with A makes BA, B with E makes BE. I would repeat, memorize, but the next day it seemed everything had left my head, like water running between fingers. I could see the disappointment in her eyes, even when she tried to hide it. Daddy, Anthony, was another story. A hard man, raised in rural Pennsylvania, who thought education was almost a luxury, especially for a girl. What's all this schooling for? A woman needs to learn to cook, clean, keep house, he would grumble. But he still agreed to send me to school. Maybe because of Mama's insistence. Maybe because deep down he wanted a schooled daughter to brag about to the other loaders at the market. The first report card was a disaster. Low grades in everything, teachers' notes saying I wasn't paying attention, that I talked too much, which was a lie, I was as quiet as a door, that I always seemed to be in la-la land. Mama looked at that paper, sighed deeply, and said quietly that she would figure something out. Daddy had another reaction. What the hell is this girl? I'm spending money on supplies, on uniforms, and you show up with these grades. The paper trembled in his large, calloused hand. This is laziness. It's slacking off. You don't want to study, you just want to goof around. But I do study, Dad, I tried to explain, already with tears in my eyes. I swear I study. A liar on top of everything. You're taking after your mother's side of the family, all good-for-nothings. Mama stepped in front, trying to defend me, but shut her mouth when he raised his hand. He didn't hit, but the gesture was enough. In that house, the final word was always his. The next day, Mama took me secretly to the doctor. Dr. Patterson was a family friend for years, had even delivered me. Simple office, in the lower part of his house, over in Greenpoint, smelling of medicine and bleach. She told him everything that was happening at school. The doctor examined me, asked questions, had me draw, write, read some words. Then he looked very seriously at my mother. Mrs. Wilson, Marcella has what we call a learning disability, probably because of her premature birth. Some areas of the brain may not have developed completely. Mama turned white as paper. But is there a cure, doctor? It's not a disease to have a cure, Mrs. Wilson. It's a condition. Marcella isn't stupid, far from it. Her brain just works differently. She'll need more time, more patience, different teaching methods. We left the office with a letter from the doctor for the school and a strange feeling. For the first time, my problem had a name, an explanation. It wasn't laziness. It wasn't lack of effort. It was something in my brain that I couldn't control. Mama put the letter in her purse, squeezed my hand and said, "Let's not tell your father for now, okay? He wouldn't understand." And so began our secret. The letter was delivered to school, and Mrs. Johnson, even without fully understanding what I had, started giving me more attention. She would sit with me after class for about 15 minutes, showing me the letters more slowly. Mama bought a special notebook with thicker lines, which helped a little. I tried so hard that I started dreaming about numbers and letters. I slept with the book under my pillow, as if knowledge could pass through osmosis during the night. I prayed, made promises, begged God to make me like the other children. The grades improved a little, but were still far from good. Each lesson was a battle, each test a torment. The words kept dancing on the paper, the numbers still jumbled as if they had a life of their own. At home, Mama became my private teacher. After Daddy fell asleep, she would sit with me in the kitchen under the dim light of a lamp to save electricity and teach me her way. Patient, she invented songs for me to memorize the letters, drew figures that helped me remember the shapes. The A looks like a little house with a person inside, see? The B is a pregnant lady from behind. Slowly, very slowly, I started learning. Not like the other children, not at the pace that school expected, but in my own way. That's when Dr. Patterson suggested I repeat the year. It would be better for Marcella to have more time to assimilate the material. Forcing her to move forward will only frustrate her more. Mama agreed, but then came the bigger problem. How to tell my father? Anthony had a silly pride in telling his friends that his daughter was in school, learning. Every now and then, he would ask me to show others that I knew how to read, making me spell out the headlines of the old newspaper he brought from work. I would stammer, make mistakes, sweat coldly, and he would shake his head, disappointed. See? Doesn't pay attention. The teacher said she's a good student, but all I see is laziness. The school sent the final report card in December 1960. Failed. The words stamped in red seemed to scream from the paper. Mama took the envelope before I could show it to my father and hid it inside her mattress. "We'll tell him after Christmas, sweetie. Let's not ruin the holidays." That was a strange Christmas. I got a cloth doll that Mama made in secret, a new dress sewn with leftover fabric from her work, and a heavy feeling of failure that no gift could wrap. While helping make the turkey, a luxury we only had once a year, I thought about how the next year would be, going back to the same class, seeing the looks of classmates who had passed. On New Year's Eve, after the neighbors had left and Daddy had already drunk more than his share, he called me into the living room. "So, Marcella, got your school results yet? Did you pass?" My heart raced. I looked at Mama, who was in the kitchen, and made a discreet gesture for me not to say anything. But Daddy noticed the exchange of glances. "What? Are you hiding something from me?" "No, Dad," I stammered. "It's just, The school hasn't given the results yet. It was the first time I lied directly to him. The lie came out crooked, just like my letters in the notebook. Daddy narrowed his eyes, suspicious. What do you mean they haven't given it? It's already the end of the year. The other kids in the neighborhood already know if they passed. It's just, the teacher said that they would send it by mail. Mama entered the living room at that moment, drying her hands on her apron. Anthony, leave the girl alone. New year, let's talk about good things. He looked from one to the other, suspicion growing. There's something fishy here. You two are hiding something from me. The rest of that night was a heavy silence. Daddy drank a bit more and fell asleep in the old living room armchair. Mama put me to bed, kissed my forehead and said, "Everything will be okay, sweetheart. We'll figure it out tomorrow." But I knew, deep in my little child's heart, that nothing would be okay. The new year that should bring hope only brought more fear. And that's how my torture began, my dears. A little girl who just wanted to learn, to be normal like the others, to make her parents proud. A little girl who didn't understand why the letters ran away from her, why the numbers hid, why her head worked differently. I didn't know yet that the worst was yet to come, that innocent little lie, told with so much fear on New Year's Eve, would be the spark that would set off a storm that would change my life forever. I couldn't imagine that soon I would know the dark basement of our house, a place that until then had only served to store old junk and would become my particular nightmare. Oh, how life takes turns. Today, sitting here in my little apartment in Brooklyn, sipping my coffee and talking with you, it seems like it all happened in another life, to another person. But the marks remain. Some on the skin, others on the soul. The first day of 1961 dawned with a shy sun coming through the window of our small two-story house in Brooklyn. I remember like it was yesterday the smell of coffee brewing in the kitchen, mixed with the aroma of day-old bread that Mama was heating on the stove. My head still heavy from the lie I had told the night before. Daddy woke up with a hangover, grumbling around, complaining about his headache. In those days, we knew it was better to stay quiet, not to bother. I stayed in my room arranging my few dolls, pretending the world outside didn't exist, that January wouldn't end, that February wouldn't come with the return to school. The vacation passed in the blink of an eye, as always happens when you're afraid of something. Soon it was February, and Mama needed to enroll me in school. There was no way to postpone the conversation with Daddy anymore. It was on a Tuesday night. Daddy had come home tired from the fish market, but in a good mood. He had managed to bring home some fruit that was going to be thrown away, slightly bruised apples, very ripe bananas. But for us, they were a feast. Mama made a dessert with the bananas that was delicious. I think she chose that moment precisely because he was satisfied, with a full belly. "Anthony," she began, her voice low, almost a whisper, "we need to talk about Marcella's school." I froze. My spoon stopped in the air with a piece of dessert that never reached my mouth. "What about school?" he asked, still distracted with the last piece of dessert on his plate. "I received her report card before Christmas," Mama continued, her hands twisting in her apron. "I didn't say anything because I didn't want to ruin the holidays." Daddy raised his eyes from the plate, already suspicious. "And why would it ruin the holidays? Didn't she pass the year?" The silence that followed was like thunder on a clear night. Mama lowered her eyes, I hunched my shoulders, and my father's face changed, going from suspicion to shock, from shock to anger. "She didn't pass? My daughter repeated a year?" His voice kept rising, until it became almost a shout. "Is that school playing games with me? Or is it you who didn't study, you little brat?" "Anthony, don't talk like that," Mama tried to intervene. "The girl has a problem." That's when everything really went south. "Problem? What problem? This girl doesn't have any problem. She's just lazy, slack. How come others pass and she doesn't? Is everyone with a problem by any chance?" Mama took a deep breath, gathering courage, and told him about the visit to Dr. Patterson, about what he had said, about the premature birth, about the difficulties I had. Daddy listened to everything with narrowed eyes, his face getting redder and redder. When Mama finished, he slammed the table so hard that the plates jumped. "That's your invention, and that quack doctor's. There's no such thing as a brain problem. That's an excuse for laziness. And you even encourage it, taking her to the doctor behind my back without telling me anything. Anthony, The doctor explained that, "I don't want to know what that doctor said. I want to know why you two lied to me. Why did you hide the report card? Why did you set up this charade?" At that moment, I started crying. Not that scandalous crying of a child throwing a tantrum, but a silent crying from someone who is ashamed of their own tears. Daddy looked at me with contempt. "Crying doesn't help, Marcella. Tomorrow you're going to school and you'll have to study twice as hard to make up for lost time. And if by mid-year you don't improve, you'll go to work. No more spending money on someone who doesn't want to learn." That night was just the beginning of a year that would be the worst of my life. The next morning, Mama took me to school to register. I had to go back to the same classroom, with the same teacher, but with classmates a year younger than me. The shame was so great that I wanted to stick my head in a hole, like those ostriches we saw in books. The new children looked at me curiously. "Why is she so big?" I heard one boy ask. "It's because she's stupid. She didn't pass," replied another. Each word was like a stab in my chest. I tried to focus on the blackboard, on the notebooks, pretend I didn't hear, but the tears insisted on appearing. At home, the situation wasn't better. Daddy now inspected my notebooks every day. He demanded that I do my homework at the kitchen table in front of him. When I made mistakes, and I made many, he would hit the table, yell, sometimes tear the page from the notebook and order me to start all over. "Look at this. It's not possible. Even a 3-year-old writes better than you." I tried to explain that it wasn't on purpose, that I couldn't see the letters properly, that they seemed to jump on the page. He didn't want to hear it. "Stop making excuses. This is lack of attention. It's laziness." Mama tried to help me when he wasn't around, but now it was more difficult. He forbade studying after dinner, saying it was slacking off, that I had to learn during the day at school, like everyone else. The months went by, and I kept struggling. No matter how hard I tried, letters and numbers remained my enemies. Mrs. Johnson tried to help me, but in a room with 30 children, she didn't have much time to give special attention to just one. In June, the first semester report card came. My grades were still bad, some even worse than the year before. The teacher wrote an observation. "Marcella shows effort, but continues to have serious learning difficulties. I recommend specialized evaluation." When Daddy saw that paper, I thought the world was going to end. First he was silent, a heavy silence that was worse than any shout. Then he crumpled the report card into a ball and threw it on the floor. "It's decided. You're not going to school anymore. You'll start working with me at the fish market. At least you'll learn to do something useful." Mama was desperate. "Anthony, she's only 8 years old. It's against the law to take her out of school." "And who's going to report it? You? The girl can stay enrolled, but she's not going to attend classes anymore. She'll help me with work in the morning and study at home in the afternoon. If she doesn't learn at school, she'll have to learn in life." That's how, at 8 years old, I started accompanying my father to work. We would leave before dawn, when the sky was still dark, to arrive at the fish market when the first deliveries came in. I carried what I could, small boxes of strawberries, small bags of beans, while Daddy took the heavy loads. We would return home at noon, exhausted. Daddy would take a nap and Mama would try to teach me something. But I was always so tired that I could barely keep my eyes open. The letters, which already danced before, now seemed to spin in an uncontrolled carousel. "Marcella, pay attention," Mama would say, worried. "Your father will ask what you learned today." And he did ask. Every night, after dinner, it was the same ritual. He would take my notebook, look at the scribbled pages, and ask questions about what I had studied during the afternoon. When I didn't know how to answer, which was almost always, the punishment came. Back then, it wasn't like today where hitting a child is a crime. It was normal, accepted, even expected that parents would correct their children with spankings, belts, slippers. But Daddy had a special way of punishing that didn't leave marks on the skin, only on the soul. He would make me kneel on corn kernels, facing the wall, for an hour or more. Or he would make me stand with my arms open, holding heavy books, until my muscles shook with fatigue. Sometimes he would lock me in the kitchen pantry, a tight, dark space where I could barely breathe. "Maybe this way you'll learn to value studying," he would say, turning the key. Mama cried in secret, but couldn't do anything. In our house, his word was law, and if she tried to defend me too much, she would get it too. This routine of work and punishment continued for months. At school, my presence was increasingly rare. Mama would invent excuses, that I was sick, that I had a doctor's appointment, but the principal was already suspicious. On one of the few times I went, she called me to her office. "Marcella, why have you been missing so much?" she asked, with that adult look that knows something is wrong. I swallowed hard, remembering my father's warning before leaving home. "If you tell anyone anything, the punishment will be worse. I've been helping my mother at home," I lied, my eyes fixed on the floor. "She's been sick." The principal didn't believe it, of course, but what could she do? Back then, in 1961, there was no child protective services. There wasn't the oversight that exists today. A child who didn't go to school was just another number in the statistics. At the end of that year, I didn't even need to take the final exams. I had already failed due to absences. The report card came by mail, and Mama managed to hide it again. But this time, there was no way to postpone the inevitable. "Anthony," she began one night, after I thought the worst had already passed, that he had forgotten the subject. Marcella failed again. I'll never forget the look he gave me. It wasn't anger. It wasn't disappointment. It was something worse, something cold, calculated. "I expected that," he said, surprisingly calm. "That one just can't be helped." That calmness scared me more than any shouting. Daddy was like a storm, loud, violent, but it passed. This sudden tranquility was like the calm before the hurricane. Christmas of 1961 was even sadder than the previous one. I didn't get presents. I didn't participate in the dinner. I was locked in my room, punished, listening to the family celebrate on the other side of the door. Mama managed to bring me a piece of French toast in secret, but that was it. At the turn of the year, while the neighbors set off fireworks and toasted with cheap apple cider, I was lying in bed, pretending to sleep, but actually praying. I asked God, all the saints I knew, that the new year would be different, that a miracle would happen and Daddy would forgive me, that I would finally be able to learn like the other children. Little did I know that my prayers would be answered in the worst possible way. That 1962 would begin with a night that would change my life forever. A night that, even after so many years, still makes me wake up sweating, screaming in the dark, as if I were still that 8-year-old girl, terrified, being dragged to the basement. But that, my dears, is a story that I still have to find the strength to tell. Because even now, more than 60 years later, the memories of that dark basement still give me chills. I can still smell the mustiness, the dampness on the walls, the darkness that seemed to swallow everything, even hope. First night of January 1962. I'll never forget that date. It's marked in my soul as if it had been burned with a branding iron. The living room clock had just struck midnight, and I was pretending to sleep, curled up under the thin blanket, listening to the sound of the last fireworks exploding far away. The house was quiet. Mama had already retired after cleaning up the kitchen, tired from the small celebration we had. Just the three of us and the heavy silence that seemed like a fourth guest at the table. Daddy had drunk more than usual, but he wasn't agitated. On the contrary, he had that frightening calmness that had appeared in the last few days, since he found out about my second failure. Sleep was finally coming when I heard my bedroom door open slowly. I thought it was Mama, coming to give me a goodnight kiss, as she sometimes did when Daddy was already asleep. But the strong smell of cigarettes and whiskey that invaded the room alerted me that it wasn't her. "Wake up," my father's voice sounded low, controlled. "I know you're not sleeping." I opened my eyes slowly, my heart beating so hard it felt like it was going to jump out of my mouth. Daddy was standing at the door, a dark silhouette cut out against the weak light from the hallway. I couldn't see his face properly, but I felt his gaze fixed on me. "Get up and come with me," he ordered, without raising his voice, without making noise. "I don't want to wake your mother." That request, not to wake Mama, was what scared me the most. Daddy never cared if Mama heard the punishments he gave me. On the contrary, he seemed to make a point of her witnessing them, as if he wanted to show who was in charge there. I got out of bed, trembling, still in my nightgown, bare feet on the cold concrete floor. I followed Daddy down the dark hallway. We went down the stairs that creaked with each step. My heart felt like it was going to explode with fear. Where was he taking me? What had he planned with that frightening calmness of the last few days? When he stopped in front of the basement door, I understood, and terror rose up my throat like bile. The basement of our house was a place that I avoided at all costs. It was under the stairs, had a low ceiling that not even Daddy could stand up straight in there. It was dark, damp, full of moths and cockroaches. It served as storage for old junk, rusty tools, moldy cardboard boxes with things that nobody used anymore, but didn't have the courage to throw away. "Dad, please," I murmured, tears already flowing before I even knew what awaited me. "I promise I'll study more. I'll learn. I swear." He didn't answer. He just unlocked the rusty padlock, opened the door that groaned on hinges needing oil, and turned on a weak light bulb that hung from the low ceiling. The yellowish light barely illuminated the space, creating shadows that seemed to move on the damp walls. "Get in," he ordered, pushing my back with enough force to make me stumble and fall to my knees on the dirty floor. The smell in there was suffocating. Mold, rotten wood, damp earth. I turned to look at Daddy, pleading with my eyes, unable to form words out of so much fear. That's when he took off his belt. It wasn't the common belt he used to hold up his pants. It was a thicker belt, dark leather, with a large metal buckle that gleamed in the dim light. I had never seen that belt before, and something told me he had saved it especially for this occasion. "Do you know why you're here, Marcella?" he asked, wrapping one end of the belt around his hand, leaving a long piece hanging. Because I repeated the year," I stammered, my whole body shaking. "No," he slowly shook his head. "You're here because you lied, because you tried to deceive me, because you made your mother lie to me too. The failure is just the consequence of your laziness. But the lie deserves a special punishment." The first blow came without warning. The leather cracked on my back over the thin nightgown, and the pain was so intense that I thought I would pass out. I bit my lip hard not to scream, remembering that he didn't want Mama to wake up. "This is for you to learn," he said, his voice still strangely controlled as the belt went up and down. "Each lie, each low grade, each day that you made a fool of me." I lost count of how many belt lashes I took, 5, 10, maybe more. At some point, my legs gave way, and I fell sideways on the dirty floor, curling up like a wounded animal, trying to protect my face with my arms. When he finally stopped, I was almost unconscious from pain. I heard the sound of the belt being placed on top of an old box. I thought the worst had passed, that he was going to take me back to my room. But I was wrong. "Now you're going to stay here and think about what you did," he said, walking towards the door. "Maybe a night in the dark will help clear your mind." "No, Dad, please," I managed to shout, desperation overcoming fear. "Don't leave me here." But he was already outside, his hand on the door. "Tomorrow, if I'm in a good mood, maybe I'll let you out. If you cry or make noise, you stay longer." The door closed with a dull thud, and I heard the padlock being locked from the outside. Then, footsteps moving away, going up the stairs, until everything was silent. And then, the light went out. I had never known darkness like that. It was dense, suffocating. It seemed to have weight and texture. You couldn't even see your own hand in front of your face. The basement had no windows, no crack of light entered there. The sounds, on the other hand, seemed amplified. The constant dripping of water in some corner, the scratching of cockroaches on the walls, and other noises that my terrified mind transformed into monsters, into ghosts, into terrible things coming to get me in the dark. I curled up in the driest corner I could find, by feeling around in the dark, hugging my knees, my back burning terribly where the belt had marked. I was shaking from cold, from fear, from pain. My teeth were chattering, and I clenched them tightly, afraid that the noise would reach upstairs and irritate my father even more. The hours dragged on as if they were days. Without a clock, without light, without a sense of time, each minute seemed like an eternity. I closed my eyes, tried to sleep, but fear and pain kept me awake. When fatigue finally won, and I dozed off, the slightest noise startled me, bringing me back to the real nightmare. At some point in the early morning, I heard a different noise. Light footsteps coming down the stairs, so light that they hardly made the old wood creak. Then, a whisper on the other side of the door. "Marcella? Sweetie, are you there?" My mother's voice was like a ray of sunshine in the midst of that darkness. I dragged myself to the door, ignoring the pain in my back. "Mom," I whispered back, my voice hoarse from so much silent crying. "Get me out of here, please." "I can't, sweetheart." Her voice was choked up. I realized she was crying too. "He took the padlock key, hid it somewhere I don't know." My heart sank. Even Mama, my only ally, couldn't help me. Did he hit you a lot?" she asked, her voice so low I could barely hear. "Yes," I answered simply. I didn't have the energy to explain, to describe the pain. There was a silence on the other side of the door, broken only by the muffled sound of her crying. "I'll bring water and food when he leaves in the morning," she promised. "Hang in there, my angel. This will pass." I heard her footsteps moving away, as careful as when she came down. I went back to my corner, a little comforted to know that Mama knew where I was, that I hadn't been completely forgotten. I can't say when sleep finally overcame me. I only know that I woke up to the sound of the door opening and the weak morning light entering along with my mother, who carried a glass of water and a piece of bread. "Eat quickly," she whispered, looking frightened at the stairs. "He left for work, but could come back at any moment if he forgets something." I drank the water as if it were the most precious nectar in the world, my dry throat burning with the liquid. I devoured the bread in a few seconds, barely tasting it, just satisfying the hunger that squeezed my stomach. "Mom, get me out of here," I begged, holding onto the hem of her skirt. "Please." She knelt in front of me, her eyes red from someone who hadn't slept all night. Only then did I notice the bruise on her cheekbone. Daddy had hit her too. "I can't, sweetie," she said, her voice trembling. "He swore that if I get you out of here, it will be worse. He'll take you away, far from me." The desperation in her eyes told me everything. She was as trapped as I was, just in a different prison. "When will he let me out?" I asked, feeling the tears coming back. "He said at the end of the day, if you stay quiet and think about what you did," she answered, passing her trembling hand through my tangled hair. "Just hold on a little longer, okay? I'll come back as soon as I can." And so went my first day in the basement. Mama managed to come back 2 more times, once at lunch, another in the middle of the afternoon, always bringing a little water, a piece of bread, and the fear stamped in her eyes of being discovered. When night fell, darkness took over the basement again. Mama had left me a candle and matches, hidden in a corner in case I needed them, but I was warned to only light them if it was very necessary, so as not to draw attention with the light under the door. The second day dawned, and still Daddy didn't come to let me out. Mama appeared in the morning, her face even more worn out. "He said he needs more time to think," she explained. "Maybe tomorrow." The third day came and went. My body ached from being curled up on the hard floor. My back still burned from the belt lashes, and the night cold penetrated to the bone. Mama continued to bring the minimum of food and water she could hide, always with the same fear in her eyes, always with the same promise. "Tomorrow, he should let you out." On the 4th day, I woke up to the sounds of arguments coming from upstairs. Daddy's voice altered, Mama's begging. I couldn't make out the exact words, but the tone was clear. She was asking him to let me out. He was refusing. Then, silence. After, heavy footsteps coming down the stairs. My heart raced when I heard the padlock being opened. The door flung open, and there he was, his face contorted in an expression that mixed anger and something else. Pleasure, perhaps. Pleasure in seeing me there, defeated, dirty, cowering in fear. "Your mother thinks you've learned your lesson," he said, entering the basement and closing the door behind him. The dim light bulb came back on, revealing his face in distorted shadows, but I'm not so sure. He took the belt from his waist, the same thick belt from days ago, and my entire body began to shake uncontrollably. "Please, Dad," I stammered. "I learned, I swear. I'll never lie again. I'll never get low grades again." He laughed. A dry laugh, without humor. "It's easy to promise when you're scared, isn't it? But let's see you keep it." The belt went up and down, once, twice, 3 times. I didn't have the strength anymore to even protect myself. I just curled up more, feeling each blow open new cuts on top of those that hadn't even healed yet. When he got tired, he threw cold water on me, water he had brought in a bucket that I only then noticed by the door. "To wash away the laziness," he said, as I choked and coughed, soaked, shaking even more in the cold of the basement. He left and locked the door again, leaving me wet, wounded, and more desperate than ever. I don't know how much longer I stayed there. The days began to mix together, the notion of time completely lost. Mama kept appearing when she could, bringing hidden food and water, cleaning my wounds with a damp cloth, crying softly while begging me to hang in there just a little longer. During one of these visits, when it must have been the 6th or 7th day, she seemed different. There was a determination in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. "I'm going to get you out of here," she whispered, looking nervously at the stairs. "Not today, but soon. I need to prepare everything first." "How?" I asked, unable to believe, afraid to create hopes that would be crushed later. "My brother," she said, so low that I had to lean in to hear. "Gerald. I sent word to him. He's a sheriff down in Virginia, remember? He's going to help us." Uncle Gerald. I barely remembered him. He had come to visit us once, years ago, but Daddy didn't like him, wouldn't let Mama keep in touch with her family. "When?" I asked, a little thread of hope lighting up in my chest. "He said he'll arrive in 2 days. I'm going to get you out of here before your father returns from work, and we'll go straight to the police station. Gerald will be waiting." That night, for the first time since I was locked in the basement, I managed to sleep a more peaceful sleep. The idea that there was an end in sight, that Uncle Gerald would come to save us, gave me strength to endure. The next 2 days were the longest of my life. Each minute seemed like an hour, each hour an entire day. Mama came fewer times, probably busy with preparations for our escape. When she appeared, she was nervous, agitated, her eyes constantly turning to the stairs. And then, finally, the day arrived. Mama appeared early in the morning, as soon as Daddy left for work. "It's today," she said, unlocking the padlock with a key she didn't have before. Faced with my surprised look, she explained, "I found it yesterday, hidden in his sock drawer. Going up the stairs was almost impossible. My legs, weak from days lying on the hard floor, barely supported me. Mama practically had to carry me, one arm around my waist, guiding me step by step. The daylight momentarily blinded me when we reached the kitchen. I closed my eyes, feeling tears run down my dirty face. The smell of fresh coffee, of bread, the sounds from the street outside, simple things I had never valued before, now seemed like precious gifts. "Let's take a bath and change clothes," Mama said, guiding me to the bathroom. "Then we'll go straight to the police station. Gerald should already be there waiting for us." The bath was painful and liberating at the same time. The hot water stung the open wounds, but washed away days of dirt, of fear, of despair. Mama helped me wash my tangled hair, scrub my marked skin carefully so as not to hurt more. Then she helped me dress in clean clothes, not the best ones, so as not to raise suspicions in case Daddy came back early, but clothes that weren't torn or stained with blood. "Ready?" she asked, taking a small bag where she had put some essential items, documents, a little money, some clothes. I nodded, not trusting my voice. I was ready. Ready to leave that nightmare, to never return to that basement, to never feel the belt on my back again, to never hear again that I was stupid, lazy, a liar. What I didn't know, as Mama opened the front door and guided me to the sunny street, was that our true liberation was just beginning. That the path would be long and difficult, but that, for the first time in a long time, there was light at the end of the tunnel, and that light had a name: justice. The fresh January air hit my face like a blessing when we left our little house in Brooklyn. My eyes, accustomed to the darkness of the basement, burned with the brightness of the day. I held tightly to Mama's hand as we walked hurriedly along the hot sidewalk. Each step hurt in my weak legs. Each movement reopened the barely healed wounds on my back, but I didn't complain. Painful freedom was still freedom. People passing by us looked away. Even in clean clothes, I must have had a frightening appearance. Too thin, pale as wax, deep circles under my eyes, my face marked from so much crying. Mama wasn't much better, with that poorly disguised bruise on her face, the nervous way of looking over her shoulder every few steps, as if expecting to see Daddy appearing at any corner. "The police station is 4 blocks from here," she murmured, squeezing my hand. "Can you walk there, or do you want me to call a taxi?" A taxi was a luxury we had never used. It meant spending money we didn't have, money we might need if things didn't go as planned. "I can walk," I answered, my voice still weak from not using it properly. It seemed like someone else's voice, hoarse and broken. We continued in silence through the familiar streets of the neighborhood, which now seemed different, as if I were seeing them for the first time. A week locked in that basement had changed my perception of the world. The colors seemed more vivid, the sounds louder, the smells more intense. Even the stench of garbage at the corner seemed almost pleasant compared to the smell of mold and dampness that had impregnated my nose. The Brooklyn police station was an old 2-story building with a peeling facade that had seen better days. The blue and white paint, official police colors, was faded from the sun and pollution. An American flag hung limply on the entrance pole, with no wind to flutter in that hot January day. We stopped in front of the building, Mama hesitant, as if only now realizing the enormity of what we were about to do. Reporting Daddy meant breaking the most sacred law of our house, the law of silence, the law that said that family problems are solved within the family. "Let's go," she said finally, more to herself than to me. "Your uncle should be waiting." We climbed the 3 entrance steps, passed through the heavy wooden door, and suddenly we were inside the police station. The environment was suffocating, a mix of sweat, cigarettes, and the characteristic smell of old papers. There was a high counter right at the entrance, where a middle-aged police officer with an unfriendly face was filling out some form. Behind him, you could see some desks with other officers, phones ringing, typewriters tapping. Mama approached the counter, still holding my hand as if afraid I might disappear if she let go. "Good morning," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "We're looking for Sheriff Gerald Wilson. He's my brother and said he would be here today." The officer raised his eyes from the form, examined us from top to bottom with that look that police officers have, as if they were always looking for something suspicious. He opened his mouth to answer, but was interrupted by a voice coming from behind him. "Betty? Is that you?" A tall man, with broad shoulders, well-cut hair already graying at the temples, and a thick mustache appeared coming out of a room in the back. He wore a simple but well-pressed suit, and had a badge attached to his belt. His eyes, the same dark brown shade as Mama's, widened when he saw us. Uncle Gerald. It had been so many years since I had seen him that I barely recognized him. The last time had been when I was about 4 years old, before Daddy forbade Mama from seeing her family. I vaguely remembered a smiling man who brought me candy and put me on his shoulders to play horsey. The man I saw now had nothing smiling about him. His face was serious, worried, and became even more so when his eyes landed on me, noticing my condition. "My God," he murmured, coming out from behind the counter and approaching us. "What happened to you two?" It was the last straw. Mama, who had been so strong throughout this ordeal, who had planned our escape so carefully, collapsed. She started crying right there, in the middle of the police station, deep sobs that shook her entire body. Uncle Gerald hugged her, casting a worried look at me over her shoulder. "Let's go to my office," he said, guiding Mama with one arm around her, the other extended to me. "We can talk with more privacy there." Uncle Gerald's office was small but organized. A dark wooden desk covered with folders and papers, 2 simple chairs in front for visitors, a larger and more comfortable one behind for him. On the walls, some framed certificates, a police calendar, and a black and white photo of a group of men in uniform. Probably his training class at the academy. He made us sit down, pulled a thermos from a low cabinet, and served water for both of us in thick glass cups. "Now tell me what's going on," he asked, sitting on the edge of the desk instead of in the chair, to be closer to us. "I received your message, Betty, but it was so vague. It only said that you needed urgent help, that it had to do with Marcella." Mama dried her tears with a handkerchief she took from her sleeve, took a deep breath, and began to tell. She talked about my difficulty at school, the doctor's diagnosis, how Daddy refused to accept that I had a real problem. She told about the first failure, then the second, about how he took me out of school and forced me to work at the fish market. And then, with a choked voice, she got to the basement part. As she spoke, I observed Uncle Gerald's face changing. At first there was only concern, then surprise, then disbelief, and finally a contained anger that made his jaw lock, his mustache tremble slightly. "He kept her locked up for a week?" he asked, his voice controlled, but with an evident tension. "Without adequate food? Without basic hygiene? In a damp and dark basement?" Mama nodded, unable to repeat the details she had already provided. "And this?" He pointed to the bruise on her face. "Was it him too?" Another silent nod. Uncle Gerald took a deep breath, as if trying to calm himself. He got up, walked to the door, opened it, and called someone. "Sergeant Baker, come here, please." A uniformed man appeared quickly. He was younger than Uncle Gerald, perhaps in his early 30s, with a face that seemed perpetually worried. "I want you to call the social worker, Ms. Wilkins, to come to the station immediately," Uncle Gerald instructed. "Tell her it's a case of child abuse and domestic violence. And afterwards, I want you to prepare a patrol car. We're going to make a visit to the address I'll give you shortly." The sergeant nodded and left quickly to carry out the orders. Uncle Gerald turned his attention back to us. "Marcella," he said, crouching in front of me to be at the level of my eyes, "I need to see what he did to you. I understand that it's difficult, but it's important to document everything properly." I swallowed hard, looking at Mama for approval. She nodded slightly, her eyes still red from crying. Slowly, I turned my back and lifted my blouse to shoulder height, revealing what I knew to be a map of bruises, cuts, and belt marks that covered my skin from shoulders to waist. I heard Uncle Gerald swear under his breath, followed by an apology for the language. I felt his fingers touch one of the marks lightly, so softly that I barely felt it. But even so, I instinctively flinched. "We need photos of this," he said, his professional voice barely hiding the anger. "It's evidence. And you need to be examined by a doctor, too." I lowered my blouse and turned around again, the tears that I thought had already dried coming back strongly. Not from pain, but from relief. Someone was listening. Someone was believing. Someone was doing something about it. The following hours passed in a blur. A woman arrived. It must have been Ms. Wilkins, the social worker. She had gray hair tied in a severe bun, but gentle eyes behind heavy-framed glasses. She took me to another room, where she took photos of my back with a large and frightening camera, making notes in a little notebook while asking me questions in a low and controlled voice. Then came a doctor, an elderly gentleman in a white coat and gentle hands, who examined each wound carefully, applied a medicine that stung but then relieved the pain, and bandaged the worst marks. When I returned to Uncle Gerald's office, there were more people there. 2 uniformed police officers waited near the door, and Mama was signing some papers, her hand shaking so much she could barely hold the pen. "We're almost ready," Uncle Gerald told me when I entered. "The doctor said you're dehydrated and with the beginning of malnutrition, besides the obvious injuries, but you'll be fine with proper care." I nodded, not knowing what to say. Everything was happening so fast that I could barely keep up. "Now we're going to your house," he continued. "Your father should be returning from work at this time, and we're going to arrest him right there. You and your mother will stay in the police car, protected. You don't even have to see him if you don't want to." The idea of returning home, of being near the basement again, caused a shiver that I couldn't disguise. Uncle Gerald noticed. "Or you can wait here if you prefer," he offered. "No," Mama said, getting up after finishing signing the papers. "I want to be there. I want to see him being taken away. I need that to believe it's really over." The journey back home was short but tense. We were in the back seat of a patrol car, Uncle Gerald in the front seat next to the driver, and another police car followed us. Nobody talked much. Every now and then, Uncle Gerald would look back and give an encouraging smile, but his eyes remained serious, determined. When we turned the corner of our street, I saw Daddy. He was arriving home, still wearing his dirty work clothes from the fish market, carrying a bag that probably contained leftover fruits and vegetables that he managed to get at the end of the day. Seeing the patrol cars stopping in front of our house, he stopped, confused. Then his eyes fixed on the car where we were, and even through the glass, I felt his gaze meet mine. For a moment, I saw surprise on his face, then understanding, and finally an anger so intense that it made me shrink in the seat. Uncle Gerald and the other police officers got out of the cars and approached him. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I saw Daddy gesturing, pointing to the car where we were, his face getting redder and redder. Then, in a movement too quick for the police officers to predict, he dropped the bag and ran off. "Son of a gun!" I heard Uncle Gerald exclaim, before setting off in pursuit along with the other police officers. Daddy was fast, used to heavy work at the fish market, knowledgeable of every alley and lane in the neighborhood. He turned a corner and disappeared from view, with the police officers right behind. We stayed in the car, Mama holding my hand so tight it hurt, both in silence, trapped in a limbo of hope and fear. What if he escaped? What if he came back later to take revenge? The same questions must have been going through her head, because I felt her hand trembling in mine. Minutes that seemed like hours passed until we saw the police officers coming back. Between them, handcuffed and with a cut on his eyebrow that was bleeding quite a lot, was Daddy. He had the look of a cornered animal, furious, scared, dangerous. When they passed by the patrol car where we were, he turned his head and spat in the direction of the car. The spit didn't come anywhere near, but the intention was clear. Even defeated, captured, he still had enough hatred for another entire lifetime of violence. Uncle Gerald pushed him into the other patrol car with more force than necessary, slamming the door with a bang before coming to us. "Caught the scoundrel trying to jump a fence over on Warren Street," he said, wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. "Fell face first on the ground. Serves him right." He looked at the two of us, still frozen in the back seat, and his face softened. "It's over," he said gently. "He's not going to hurt you anymore. He's going to answer for everything he did." Somehow, hearing these words from Uncle Gerald's mouth, a sheriff, a man of the law, made everything real. It's over. It really is over. We wouldn't have to live in fear anymore. There would be no more punishments in the basement. There would be no more belts and shouting and humiliations. The tears came again, but this time I didn't try to hold them back. I cried openly, sobbing like the child I was, letting out all the pain, all the fear, all the sadness of those terrible days. Mama hugged me, crying too, and we stayed like that for a long time, consoling each other while the patrol car that carried Daddy moved away towards the police station. Uncle Gerald gave us a few minutes, then opened the car door. "We need to get some of your things," he said. "Clothes, documents, whatever is necessary. You can't stay here." "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice choked from crying. "To Virginia, with me," he replied as if it were obvious. "I have a small apartment, but comfortable. There's room for both of you until we find something better." "But your work is here," Mama said, looking confused. "How will that work?" "I'm being transferred to Virginia next week," he explained. "That's why I came to New York, to sort out the final details of the transfer. Your message arrived just in time." It was as if fate had conspired in our favor, after so long conspiring against us. Uncle Gerald's transfer, the fact that he was in New York precisely when we needed him most, the padlock key that Mama found. Small coincidences that, together, meant our salvation. We entered the house one last time, accompanied by Uncle Gerald and one of the police officers. Mama took only the essentials, some clothes, the few documents we had, an old photo of her parents, the wooden rosary that had been her grandmother's. There wasn't much more worth taking. I passed through my room, looking at the unmade bed from which I had been torn that fateful night. I took my cloth doll, the only memento I wanted to keep from that house. Everything else could be left behind. When we passed by the basement door, I couldn't help but stop and look. The door was ajar, revealing the darkness inside. A shiver ran down my spine as I remembered the days and nights spent in that hole. "Never again," I murmured to myself. "Never again will anyone lock me in any place." We left the house without looking back. The sun was already setting, painting the New York sky with shades of orange and pink that seemed too beautiful for a day like that. We got back into the patrol car, now with some bags containing our belongings, and headed towards the police station. There, more papers were signed. Statements were taken, now officially. The doctor came again to examine my back, reinforcing the bandages. The social worker gave Mama some pamphlets about support services, about how to get a restraining order, about the rights of women and children victims of violence. It was already night when we finally left the police station, exhausted but free. Uncle Gerald had his own car, a dark blue Chevy that was parked at the back of the building. He put our bags in the trunk and opened the doors for us. "To Virginia, then?" he asked, a slight smile trying to lighten the weight of the day. "To Virginia," Mama agreed, a deep sigh escaping from her lips. "For a new beginning." As the car moved away from New York, the lights of the big city left behind, I looked out the window and made a silent promise to myself. The promise that, no matter what the future held, I would never again be that frightened girl locked in a basement. I would never again let anyone convince me that I was stupid, lazy, or useless. I would never again be afraid to learn, to try, to fail, and try again. The road to Virginia, to our new life, was long. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of the journey, because now I knew that no matter how bad things could get, there would always be a door opening somewhere. There would always be a chance to escape from the basement and find the light. The road to Virginia that January night of 1962 seemed like the path to another life. As Uncle Gerald's Chevy cut through the darkness, I watched the lights of New York receding through the rear window. The city that had been my home, my nightmare, my prison, diminished in the distance until it became just an orange glow on the horizon. I arrived in Virginia with an aching body, a wounded soul, but with a new feeling growing inside me. Hope. Uncle Gerald's house was in a simple neighborhood near Chesapeake Bay. It was small, living room, kitchen, bathroom, and 2 bedrooms. But for someone who had spent a week in a damp basement, it seemed like a palace. Large windows let in the bay breeze, the sound of birds soothed sleep, and the smell of fresh air replaced the mustiness that still seemed impregnated in my nose. "This room is yours," Uncle Gerald said, opening the door to a simple room with 2 twin beds. "It's not much, but it's clean and safe." Safe. That word echoed in my head as I placed my cloth doll on the pillow. A place where I could sleep without fear, where no one would drag me in the middle of the night, where there would be no belts, no shouting, no basements. The first days in Virginia were about adaptation and recovery. The wounds on my back gradually healed thanks to the medicines and bandages that Uncle Gerald provided. The doctor who attended me said there would be no permanent physical scars. "Children have an incredible capacity for regeneration," he explained. "The other scars, the invisible ones, would take much longer to heal, if they ever would completely." Mama was also transforming little by little. At first, she still jumped startled at any louder noise, still looked nervously at the door as if expecting to see Daddy entering at any moment. But as the weeks passed, her face lost that permanent expression of fear. She began to smile more, to speak louder, to make decisions without consulting anyone. I remember the day she cut her hair. That long black hair that Daddy wouldn't let her touch. That always had to be tied in a severe bun. She came back from the salon with her hair at shoulder length, a modern cut for the time. She looked 10 years younger, and when she looked in the mirror, I saw a spark in her eyes that I thought had been extinguished forever. The school issue arose in the first few weeks. Uncle Gerald insisted that I needed to go back to studying, that it was my right, but just thinking about it made me feel a knot in my stomach. "What if I can't do it again?" I asked one night, as we dined at the small kitchen table. "What if the letters keep jumping, if the numbers keep mixing up? I know a school nearby that has teachers specialized in children with learning difficulties," Uncle Gerald replied, serving more potatoes on my plate. He always served me extra portions, concerned about making up for the days of hunger in the basement. "It's not like in New York. Here they know how to deal with this. They have different methods." The school Uncle Gerald mentioned was a few blocks from our house. It was smaller than my old school in Brooklyn, with more airy classrooms and smaller classes. On my first visit, the principal, Mrs. Thompson, carefully read the report that the doctor had made about my condition. "Dyslexia," she said, pronouncing a word I had never heard before. "That's what we call the type of difficulty you have, Marcella. It has nothing to do with intelligence. Some of the most brilliant people in history had dyslexia. It was the first time someone gave a name to my problem that wasn't laziness, slacking off, or stupidity. Dyslexia." The word sounded strange, medical, but somehow comforting. It meant that I wasn't alone, that other people went through the same thing, that there was a path to follow. I started in the 3rd grade again, but this time with proper support. My teacher, Ms. Adams, had experience with dyslexic children. She taught me techniques to deal with the dancing letters, used colored materials that helped distinguish sounds, and most importantly, she had infinite patience. "There's no right time to learn," she would tell me when I got frustrated for not keeping up with the rhythm of others. Each one has their own internal clock. The first months were difficult. Years of being called stupid had left deep marks on my self-esteem. Each mistake made me expect a shout, a humiliation, a punishment that didn't come. Instead, I received an encouraging smile, a new explanation, a chance to try again. Slowly, very slowly, I started learning. Not just to read and write better, but to trust myself, to believe that I was capable. The first time I managed to read an entire paragraph without stumbling over the words, I cried with joy. Miss Adams hugged me, her eyes also teary, as if she understood exactly the size of that victory. Meanwhile, life at home was also finding a new rhythm. Uncle Gerald worked during the day at the sheriff's office, and Mama got a job at a clothing store in town. It was the first time she worked outside the home. Daddy had never allowed it. She would return exhausted, but with a gleam of satisfaction in her eyes, proud to bring her own money home. News about Daddy came through Uncle Gerald. The trial was set for June 1962. Mama would have to testify, but the judge allowed me to be spared that trauma. My testimony had already been collected and would be read during the process. When the day came, I woke up with a strange feeling in my chest. Even hundreds of miles away, even knowing he was in jail and couldn't reach me, the fear was still there, coiled like a serpent around my heart. Mama left early with Uncle Gerald for New York. I stayed with Ms. Wilkins, the social worker who had become a family friend and lived in the same neighborhood as us. I spent the day restless, unable to concentrate on the books or games she suggested to distract me. They only returned late at night. I heard the key in the door and ran to the living room, anxious for news. Mama's face was pale, exhausted, but there was something different in her eyes, a mixture of relief and resolution. 15 years, was all she said, sitting heavily on the sofa. 15 years in prison. The maximum that the law allowed at the time for the crimes Daddy had committed. Part of me felt relief. He would be away for a long time. He couldn't hurt us. Another part felt a confusing sadness, difficult to explain even now, so many years later. After all, as much of a monster as he had become, he was still my father. Did he say anything? I asked, hesitantly. Mama exchanged a look with Uncle Gerald before answering. He didn't regret anything, she finally said. He said he did what any father would do with a disobedient daughter and a traitorous wife. Those words confirmed what, deep down, I already knew. The Daddy we knew, or thought we knew, had been lost a long time ago, maybe had never really existed. The man condemned in that court was just an empty shell full of anger and bitterness. "It's better for you to forget him, Marcella," Mama continued, stroking my hair. "We're going to build a new life here, just the two of us." And that's what we did. The following years were about reconstruction, discoveries, small and large victories. Mama was promoted at the store, then got a better job at a more sophisticated boutique. I continued studying, each year with less difficulty than the previous one, thanks to the techniques I learned to deal with dyslexia. In 1965, Uncle Gerald married Ms. Wilkins, the social worker. It was a simple ceremony at the courthouse, followed by a lunch at the apartment that we decorated with flowers from the yard. Around the same time, we managed to rent our own apartment, a small but cozy place a few blocks from the bay. Life in Virginia had a different rhythm from New York. Slower, gentler, like the waves that came and went on the bay that became my refuge. On Sunday mornings, Mama and I would take a basket with fruits and sandwiches and spend the entire day sitting by the water, talking, reading, yes, reading, or simply looking at the water in comfortable silence. Finishing elementary school was an achievement we celebrated with a chocolate cake that Mama made especially for the occasion. Entering middle school was another important milestone. Each completed grade was a victory against the ghost of that man who had called me stupid, who had tried to convince me that I would never be anything. In 1968, I received the news that would change the course of my life again. Uncle Gerald came home one night, his face grave, and asked to speak with Mama in private. I stayed in the living room, pretending to read a book, but actually trying to hear the conversation in the kitchen. I only managed to catch fragments, but it was enough to understand. Daddy had died in prison. The details came later, in whispered conversations that weren't for my ears, but that I managed to catch anyway. A fight between inmates, an improvised knife, a guard who arrived too late. I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel joy. Just a strange emptiness, as if a door had finally closed. Mama seemed to feel the same. She didn't cry. She didn't lament. She just nodded when Uncle Gerald asked if she wanted him to take care of the burial. "Do the minimum necessary," she said. "We're not going to the funeral." And we didn't go. That day, while somewhere in New York, a simple coffin descended into the earth with the remains of the man who had been my father. I was at school, presenting a project on American history. Life went on, without looking back. The 70s arrived with all their changes and novelties. I was already a teenager, discovering music, fashion, friendships, and first loves. Dyslexia was still there, but I had learned to live with it, to not let it define me. I still had to study more than others. I still needed more time to read and write, but I no longer felt less because of it. In 1972, I took the entrance exam for the education program. I wanted to be a teacher, to help other children like me who had difficulties that nobody understood. Mama was so proud when I passed that she gave a party for the entire neighborhood, serving cake and soda to whoever showed up. College was another challenge overcome. Each test, each assignment, each presentation was a battle against dyslexia, but they were battles that I already knew how to fight. I graduated in 1976 at 24 years old with grades that weren't the highest in the class, but that represented much more effort than most could imagine. It was in college that I met Robert, a law student with gentle eyes and an easy smile, who invited me for coffee after a lecture on inclusive education. At first, I hesitated. Men scared me, brought memories I preferred to forget. But Robert was different. Patient, respectful, understanding when I told him about my past, about the scars that couldn't be seen. We got married in 1978, in a simple ceremony by the bay, with few guests, but a lot of love. Mama cried throughout the entire ceremony, but they were tears of happiness. She herself never remarried, never wanted another man in her life. "I've had enough love for a lifetime," she would say when someone asked, with an enigmatic smile that I never fully managed to decipher. Robert and I had 2 children, Paul in 1980 and Mary in 1983. When Paul started showing the same signs of difficulty that I had had in school, I recognized them immediately. This time, there was no panic, no shame, just the certainty that he would have all the support that I didn't have, that he would never go through what I went through. Life followed its course, with joys and sorrows like any other. Mama left us in 1995, as gently as she had lived her last years. She went to sleep one night and didn't wake up the next morning. Uncle Gerald departed a few years later in 1998, leaving an immense void in our family. Robert retired from law practice in 2010. I from the special school I helped found in 1985. Our children grew up, graduated, built their own families. Paul became a doctor, specializing in pediatric neurology. Mary followed in my footsteps and became a teacher, working with children with special needs. And now, at 73 years old, sitting here at this window in Brooklyn where I returned to live after Robert passed away in 2018, I look back and see a life that could have been completely different if it wasn't for that dawn in January 1962, when Mama found the courage to get me out of the basement and ask for help. My dears who have listened to me until now, this is the story of Grandma Marcy, a girl who was called stupid but became a teacher, who was locked in a basement but found freedom, who was broken but rebuilt herself stronger. If you're going through difficult times, if you feel that you're trapped in your own basement, whatever it may be, know that there is always a way out. There is always a light at the end of the tunnel. You just need to take the first step towards it. Before I say goodbye, I would like to make a special request. If this story touched your heart, give a thumbs up to this video and subscribe. This helps this old lady a lot to continue sharing her stories and perhaps helping other people who are going through similar difficulties. A tight hug from this grandma who, despite everything, believes in love, in the strength of justice, and in the capacity that we all have to rebuild ourselves, no matter how many times life tries to knock us down. Until the next video, my dears. Thank you for your patience. I'll complete the adaptation of the script, ensuring all cultural references reflect the United States rather than Brazil, and implement the requested changes for your Grandparents' Tales channel.